so happy we alive.
Good evening and welcome to Louisville Late Night. I'm Patrick Moore, and this evening we're delighted to be in beautiful Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, our northern neighbors and friends. And this evening we're delighted to have with us here a leader, a scholar, Mr. Richard COWAN, who has served as director of the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. And I'm not going to waste any more time. I want to go ahead and briefly introduce you to Richard and ask Richard to share with us some of his experiences in the life of the decriminalization movement, and also what he's learned from living up here in Vancouver, Canada, what's going on here, and also what's going on in Amsterdam and the rest of the world. I'm pleased to introduce to you Richard COWAN. Richard.
Yes, well, I think starting where we are here in Vancouver is interesting because the head of the narc and vice squad here announced that they were no longer going to arrest people for possession of anything, and in fact there are virtually no arrests here in the city for marijuana possession, just that in terms of people who are users. So people are much more relaxed about it, and on Hastings Street, down by the Marijuana Party offices there, which I guess that sounds a little, the idea of a marijuana party having offices may sound a little strange to some people, but there are places, Blunt Brothers and the New Amsterdam Cafe, where you can smoke, and nobody was worried about the police coming in. Now, you still can't buy it here. And this, of course, is really, really dumb social policy in the sense that if you want to buy weed, there are guys standing out on Hastings Street that will sell it to you, but you don't know what it is. And, of course, some of those people will also, particularly if you go a couple blocks in the wrong direction, offer you heroin and cocaine as well. So it is the current policy of the city of Vancouver to tolerate smoking, but to keep the market for cannabis in the same distribution channels with hard drugs, and obviously that's dumb social policy. But overall, this is one of the more enlightened jurisdictions in the world. That a few places in Europe, of course, the Bay Area in San Francisco is in some ways as nice as this, in some ways a little bit ahead, in some ways, of course, they're always having to look over their shoulder to see if there are paratroopers landing, which is not yet the problem up here. But Canada is sort of slowly defecting from the drug war, and the threats to Canadian sovereignty, which have been being made rather unsubtly out of Washington these days, are ticking off our Canadian friends. And this is, I think, probably helping us perversely, because this really becomes a sovereignty issue for all Canadians, not just Canadians who are anti-prohibitionist. But this is, I think, an indication of something very, very important. Maybe even more important, I think definitely more important than what is happening here, is what's happening in the UK, where cannabis prohibition is collapsing. And there are a couple of coffee shops already been opened, although they are all very vulnerable to police action yet. But this is the level of defiance that's going on in the UK is basically the sort of last stages of cannabis prohibition. Very much analogous to what happened in the Netherlands about 20 years ago, when they finally decided that they weren't, 25 years ago, when they decided they didn't like arresting people for cannabis possession. And then as they started tolerating coffee shops, some people got busted in the early days of the coffee shops, but they were reopened immediately. And this is a matter of pushing the envelope. And so now the same thing is happening in the UK, and I think it's spreading really through Europe. And we will see, I think, coffee shops operating in Vancouver in all probability next year, if not this year. That is to say, places not only tolerating smoking as they do now, but actually having a house dealer or something like that. And actually, there are a few places around here that have house dealers. I just can't tell you where they are.
So it sounds like you're saying that there's progress going on in the world as a whole, aside from what confusion reigns in the USA.
Well, that's why I call it DEA land. It's basically the U.S. policies.
DA land?
DEA land.
Oh, DEA land.
Yeah. But in America, the control of the drug war is in the hands of three people who are, well, two of them are wingnuts. I put it bluntly. Ashcroft and Walters are so extreme that they are totally out of touch with the American people. Asa Hutchinson, the head of the DEA, who's a former politician and much more realistic, that is, he is nonetheless ruthless, but I think that he is probably sane. He was chosen.
You think he's probably sane?
Yes, probably sane.
Hutchinson?
And that he was chosen because he was the former U.S. Attorney for Arkansas, so that he knows everything about Mena, Arkansas, and who's not supposed to be arrested as a result of the cocaine trafficking through Mena, Arkansas, when Bush the First was president and Bill Clinton was governor of Arkansas. That's Ollie North's little enterprise there. But this is, the fact is that Walters has made very, very clear that the war on marijuana is really going to be the central element of the drug war, and that is he has his priorities right from the prohibitionist perspective, because this really is the meat and potatoes of their business, and the suppression of medical cannabis is the highest priority for the U.S. drug war. So it's just basically the direct opposite of what most Americans think it should be. Most Americans are in favor of medical cannabis. Most Americans are opposed to arresting marijuana users, much less medical users. But the thrust of the federal drug war in the United States now is the war on cannabis. There's no doubt about that. And this, of course, puts, again, the U.S. completely out of step with the rest of the world.
Uh-huh.
Now, background on this, I think, is it gets into something very complicated, but as you say, I've been at this for a long time. It was 30 years ago next month, I guess, when I walked into the normal office in Washington, D.C. to volunteer to help, and that be careful where you volunteer, I guess. There we are, mere 30 years later.
This is in Washington, D.C.?
Yes.
Uh-huh. But 30 years ago, you
30 years ago
walked
this summer,
in.
yeah.
This is after graduating from Yale?
Well, actually, it was after my 10th reunion. I'd been at Yale for my 10th reunion. There's actually a book about this that makes me 10 years younger than I am. I wish. But that was actually not just graduated from Yale. I just come back from my 10th reunion. And I went down to Washington. I always like to say that when I was at Yale, I was president of Young Republicans, and so I had all these friends who were working for Nixon and Agnew and the committee to re-elect the president and so on. And so I was seriously considering going to work for them, and I ended up working for Normal instead. I always say that I went to work for a better class of criminals, and so that sort of one thing led to another, and here I am in Vancouver 30 years later. So for me, cannabis prohibition has been an amazing experience. I have so many friends who've been so badly hurt. I mean, people in prison, people who are desperately ill and who live in fear. I know so many people who've been arrested and had their lives wrecked by being arrested in some cases. And I watch this from a very privileged position, and if people weren't being hurt, I always said that this would be the best job in the world. But when I was at Normal, it was so painful. I used to say that the job was intellectual heaven but emotional hell, because there are so many people, and now there are even more being arrested. Almost 2,000 people a day, or I guess more than 2,000 people a day being arrested now, and ability to